It's not just auto workers who have been affected by the trade war. We're seeing a lot of forestry workers have lost their jobs as well. They've been laid off as well. Federal government has touted endlessly things like the job sharing arrangement that they believe will be able to prevent some of these layoffs. What is the disconnect here? Because it's clearly not working, because we're seeing workers get their layoff notices. What is the disconnect between government policy right now and what's happening?
The disconnect is the complete and utter failure of the government to get an agreement on any of the issues that we have with the United States. The softwood lumber dispute has been going on for somewhere close to 9 years now with absolutely no action. In fact, it gets worse every single time. The countervailing and anti-dumping duties go up. The job losses and the mill closures accelerate. Meanwhile, it's not even on the agenda. For our forestry workers, they must think this government has completely abandoned them. It's never even discussed by the Mark Carney government. And on the other tariffs on auto, again, we have to remember, Mark Carney promised to have a deal with the United States by, I think it was July 21st. We're now 8-10 months past that, and things are only getting worse. Which brings me back to the question. I want everyone to think about this. When they're tariffing our vehicles to the point where we're having 5,000 auto workers lose their job, 2 plants that now have laid off all their workers, they're going to give rebates to American-made EVs. It's a kick in the teeth to auto workers. I spent the weekend talking to them. So their strategy on every level is not working. And we can't fix that. Their incompetent strategy. What we can do is suggest ideas that will make a difference. And that's what my colleague and I are doing today.
There you have it, guys. Today is Tuesday, February 10th. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. This is Canuck Good News, guys. I have a pretty good article today, a pretty great story, kind of tying into everything that's been going on with all of this rhetoric between Canada and the U.S. and these trade negotiations and all of that. And it's a new kick in the teeth from Donald Trump to Canada. And yes, Donald Trump is an asshole. He absolutely is. But, I mean, that is nowhere in comparison to how utterly incompetent the moves that have been announced by this government have been in trying to resolve the immediate pain that the Canadian economy is going through. So what we have here is we have a $6.4 billion bridge between Windsor and Detroit that's paid entirely by Canada. Trump wants to own half of it. He's like, we're not getting anything out of it. He's like, I want half. So he won't open it until the United States is fully compensated for everything they've given Canada, guys. Nobody really knows what he's talking about. This really isn't about the bridge, because this is essentially Trump applying a new pressure on Canada before the USMCA negotiations in July. And you saw in the video earlier, Carney promised to have this done by have the USMCA renegotiated, but by July 21st of last year. We're basically 8 months past that. Nothing's happened. The situation's only getting worse. And Canada's essentially entering into these negotiations in the worst possible position, because Carney's spent months quite literally avoiding the U.S. There's been no public trips to Washington to negotiate. There's no visible action on fentanyl. Trump's just been, which were Trump's stated justification for the tariffs in the first place. Carney's running around giving speeches in Davos. He's running to India to try and sign deals. He's trying to get foreign direct investment from Southeast Asia and trying to push all of these domestic policy announcements, guys. Meanwhile, we have Mexico, who's been publicly working with the U.S. for months. They've been building this goodwill. They're positioning themselves for good faith negotiations. In Canada, guys, we're entering into July looking like an adversary and not a partner. All the while, an essential industry for Ontario is just being devastated. That's the auto industry, as well as the steel industry and aluminum. And Trump is essentially showing exactly what that costs, what this lack of goodwill is going to cost us, because we've just shut down 2 GM plants in Ontario. We've laid off like 5,000 people. It's crazy. But let's get through the article, guys. Donald Trump is threatening to block the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, a new border crossing between Canada and the United States. Unless Ottawa meets a list of demands and gives Washington half ownership of the structure, The $6.4 billion bridge between Windsor and Detroit was funded by the Canadian government and was intended by Ottawa to provide another crossing option along the most important trade artery between Canada and the United States. In a Truth Social post Monday, the U.S. president repeated a long-standing grievance against Canada that it's treated the United States very unfairly for decades and expressed anger over the bridge's ownership structure. With all that we have given them, we should own perhaps at least one half of this asset, he said of Canada and the bridge. The revenues generated because of the U.S. market will be astronomical. Guys, and this is really a place where I'd like to stop right here because Trump is demanding half ownership of a bridge that Canada literally paid for outright, $6.4 billion. His demand is kind of absurd when you look at it from that angle. But let's talk about why this is happening now. Because the USMCA negotiations, they're coming up in July. The July 1st, 2026 deadline is for all three countries to confirm in writing whether they're going to be renewing this. And this bridge threat is Trump just applying more pressure going into these negotiations. And here's really where the problem is with Canada, is we're entering into those negotiations having done nothing publicly to build goodwill with the U.S. Mark Carney's been prime minister for months. In that time, he's made no public trip to Washington to discuss the USMCA. Has he announced a joint Canada-U.S. negotiating team? No. Has he publicly said we're working with the U.S. to resolve outstanding trade issues? No. What has Carney actually done? He's made speeches in Davos criticizing U.S. protectionism. He's traveled to India to talk about diversification. He's announced all of these domestic policy initiatives, these major projects. He's made just lists. Not once has he publicly prioritized the U.S. relationship. Now we can compare that to Mexico, who's been publicly working with the U.S. for months. They have 4 times Canada's population. They're not in a weaker position than Canada, but they understand something that Canada clearly didn't. That when the USMCA negotiations are coming in, you build goodwill ahead of time, guys. You engage publicly. You show you're taking the relationship seriously. You position yourself as a partner and not an adversary. And this is what Mexico is doing. Canada is doing the exact opposite. So when July comes and the US-Mexico negotiations come through, they're going to say, we've been working together for months on shared issues, and here are some of the remaining items we need to finalize. When the US and Canada negotiations come through, the US is going to say, you guys have ignored us. You've criticized us in Davos. You've talked about pivoting to China and to India, and now you want to negotiate. It's not gonna fly. It's not gonna happen. Canada is entering July position as an adversary, guys, and it's not because of what happened in private. We don't know what happened privately, but it's because of what's happened in public. And in international relations, public positioning matters a lot, guys. Under the 2012 Canada-Michigan crossing agreement, the Gordie Howe Bridge is to be publicly owned by the governments of Canada and Michigan. The bridge is operated by the government of Canada through the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, a not-for-profit federal crown corporation. Ottawa will recoup the cost of building the bridge through tolls collected on the Canadian side. The bridge is expected to be opened this year. As the state of Michigan announced in a 2012 news release, only Canada would charge tolls on the bridge, and the Canadian government would pay all costs of the required land acquisition in Canada and Michigan, as well as the cost for an interchange to connect the new bridge to the US I-75 highway. Mr. Trump on Monday complained that the bridge has virtually no US content, including steel, and noted Canada is waiting for a US permit for the bridge to operate. Now, the Canadian government expects me, as President of the United States, to permit them to just take advantage of America. What does the United States of America get? Absolutely nothing. And let me break down what Canada actually paid for here. We paid $6.5 billion for the bridge, 100% Canadian funded. We got the land acquisition for Canada and Michigan, 100% Canada funded. The I-75 highway interchange, all Canadian funded. And Canada's only going to charge tolls to recoup those costs, right? So what's Michigan getting? They're getting a free bridge. They're getting free land acquisition. They're getting a free highway interchange. It's a second border crossing to reduce congestion at zero cost. So when Trump says, guys, the U.S. isn't getting anything, we're getting absolutely nothing, it's a lie. It's a lie. Michigan's getting billions of dollars worth of infrastructure for free. But Trump can say this And he can make absurd claims because that's what he does. He makes absurd claims and then he goes into a negotiation and he negotiates from a different position. And Canada's building no goodwill in the meantime while this is all happening, guys. It goes, he repeated a long-standing beef that protectionist Canadian tariffs, which affect how much foreign dairy product can enter the country, are hurting U.S. farmers. The tariffs Canada charges us for our dairy products have for many years been unacceptable, putting our farmers at great financial risk, Mr. Trump said. I will not allow this bridge to open until the United States is fully compensated for everything we have given them, and also importantly, Canada treats the U.S. with the fairness and respect that we deserve. We will start negotiations immediately. The Prime Minister's office did not comment when asked. Mr. Trump also cited Ontario's decision to direct the LCBO to remove all U.S. alcoholic products from shelves after Washington imposed tariffs on Canadian goods such as steel and aluminum. Ontario won't even put U.S. spirits, beverages, and other alcoholic products on their shelves. They are absolutely prohibited from doing so, the U.S. president said. Guys, and this is a great time to spot because this is look what he's citing. Look what Trump is citing. Dairy tariffs. Ontario LCBO not pushing U.S. alcohol, guys. What's not on the list? Fentanyl is not on the list. And this is Trump's original justification for imposing tariffs on Canada was fentanyl coming across the border. And that was his original stated reason, guys. And so what has Carney done to publicly address any of this? Has he announced increased border security measures? No. Has he announced the joint Canada-U.S. task force on fentanyl interdiction? No. Has he made any public announcement showing Canada is taking Trump's stated concerns seriously? No. This is essentially strategic incompetence. If Trump says tariffs are because of fentanyl, your response should be, let's announce a visible, let's make a team to address the fentanyl issue because, there's clearly some kind of coordination happening between with the cartels moving drugs north instead of south, right? We need to make these joint border security initiatives, guys. We need to increase screening. We need to do this collaboration with U.S. law enforcement. Even if you think the fentanyl isn't the real reason, it doesn't really matter. You address the stated justification publicly because when Trump continues tariffs, you can say, guys, we addressed all of this. You're still imposing these tariffs, so it's not really about fentanyl, is it? Why are you doing this? And you take away the justification. Canada hasn't done any of this. So Trump can still claim fentanyl is the problem. Canada has no public record of trying to solve it to point to. This is, guys, basic negotiation, especially when you're the subordinate. Canada is not the market that the world is looking to invest in. It's the U.S. So our positioning is a position of subordination, unfortunately, but it's the truth. And so is Mexico's. This is how you start building your position for when the actual negotiation happens so that you can negotiate in good faith and get better terms. Carney's not doing any of this, guys. Down here we goes, the Marone family, which owns the other Windsor-Detroit bridge crossing, the Ambassador Bridge, has long opposed the construction of the Gordie Howe Bridge. As the Detroit Free Press wrote in 2018, the Ambassador Bridge owners have told Mr. Trump and others in Washington and Michigan that a Canadian-built, Canadian-financed rival bridge makes no economic sense, violates the law, and will unfairly hurt its business. Mr. Trump took time out in the middle of his lengthy Monday post about the bridge to inveigh against Canada's trade dealings with China and expressed an unconventional opinion that this could somehow affect the future of hockey. Prime Minister Carney wants to make a deal with China, which will eat Canada alive. We'll just get the leftovers. I don't think so, Mr. Trump said. The first thing China will do is terminate all ice hockey being played in Canada and permanently eliminate the Stanley Cup. This really gives us some additional context into what's going on, right? Because the Marone family, who owns the Ambassador Bridge, has been lobbying Trump against the Gordie Howe Bridge, guys. They have a monopoly on the Windsor-Detroit crossings. And this new bridge essentially breaks that monopoly. So they've told Trump, guys, this bridge makes no economic sense. It's in violating all of these laws and all this stuff. And Trump's essentially doing their bidding. He's protecting private monopolies, protecting U.S. business. And you notice Trump's bizarre digression about China and hockey, guys. He's just responding to Carney's public statements about making deals with China. Guys, Carney has been publicly pivoting and talking to China. So while publicly avoiding engagement with the U.S., how do you think this plays in Washington? Canadian Prime Minister says he wants to make deals with our adversary, China, but won't come to Washington to negotiate with it. This is essentially this is that narrative that's kind of being built, right? China's good for Canada, but the U.S. isn't, guys. And so let's summarize where Canada is really positioned going into the July USMCA negotiations. Because public record of Carney's approach is we have no public trips to Washington to negotiate. There's no visible action on fentanyl. There's no announcements of joint U.S.-Canada initiatives. Canada's made speeches in Davos criticizing U.S. protectionism. He talks about deals with China. Ontario's removed U.S. alcohol from the LCBO. What's Mexico's approach been? Publicly working with U.S. on all issues, migration, the cartels, human trafficking, building goodwill ahead of the July deadline. And they're positioned more as a partner and not an adversary. And what's the result? Mexico's entering into July in good faith. Canada's entering in July with no good faith built, no goodwill, looking like an adversary. Trump's threatening to block this $6.4 billion investment of ours. Guys, this matters because the USMCA negotiations will determine whether Canada retains tariff-free access to the US market, whether foreign investors will invest in Canada because they're waiting for the USMCA to clarify. They want to know what's going to happen. And whether Canada can actually diversify, because we won't be able to get any diversification without the USMCA. So everything depends on these negotiations, and Canada is entering them in the worst possible position. It's not because of what happened privately, it's because of what happened publicly. Public engagements matter. It builds goodwill. It shows you're taking the relationship seriously. It positions you as a partner trying to solve problems together. Carney's done none of this, and now Trump is just showing him the costs, guys. And why this really matters to Canadians, guys, because this isn't just about one bridge. This is about Canada's strategic incompetence going into the most important trade negotiations in decades. Carney literally, this was a low-hanging fruit on which Carney could have been winning points domestically by alleviating tariffs early to get Canadian business going. But we didn't do that. So now we're threatening our own preferential access to the U.S. market. And now whether $1 trillion in annual Canada-U.S. trade continues, right? That's what's key here. And whether 90% of Canadian exports remain exempt from Trump's tariffs. So whether foreign investors invest in Canada, because that's what we're waiting for. That's what they're all waiting for. I talked about it in yesterday's episode. Everything hinges quite literally on these negotiations, guys. And Carney's spent months making speeches in Davos criticizing the U.S., traveling to India to talking diversification, publicly discussing China deals, letting Ontario remove U.S. alcohol from shelves, while doing nothing visible to engage with the U.S. on the USMCA, address Trump's stated fentanyl concerns, build goodwill for upcoming negotiations, position Canada as a partner. Mexico understood the assignment, guys. They've been publicly working with the U.S. for months. The question is, what should have Carney done? We have the way I see it, there's two options, guys. One is public engagement. Announce the trip to Washington to discuss the USMCA. Do joint border security measures on fentanyl. Canada-U.S. working together to resolve trade issues. Position as a partner, not adversary. Or option B is, quiet accommodation. If you're going to avoid public engagement, at least don't publicly criticize, guys. No Davos speeches about U.S. protectionism. No public China deal discussions. No, keep your head down and work privately, guys. That's essentially it. What Carney actually did was public criticism of the U.S., public China pivot, public LCBO retaliation, zero public engagement on solving any of the problems. It's literally, he did the worst of both worlds. And he's provoked without actually building any goodwill. And he's now entering July with no leverage and bad positioning. It's quite literally just a catastrophe for Canada and for Canadians. This is all I have for you guys today. Please let me know what you guys think. Obviously, these are my opinions. I don't think that we're positioned in a great way. I think we're actively deteriorating ourselves. You heard the guy... You heard the conservative fellow there in the X video. The softwood lumber issues existed for like 9 years, and it's just progressively getting worse. We're never talking to the U.S. about solving that issue, and it just seems like this is escalating. We're seemingly escalating our deterioration. But please, I'd love to hear from you guys what you guys think. I actually really value reading everybody's opinions in the comments section. I try and respond to everybody as fast as I can, but it is what it is. Stay informed, stay curious, and God bless Canada.
This is Canada. Maple syrup and like Captain say, kick your ass all hockey season,